Papatapos na ang August and we're entering the bear months. And the race for vaccines is also intensifying. And para kay Pangulong Duterte, he's putting all his eggs in the basket of vaccines, either from China or from Putin's Russia. So the president is relying on countries like Russia, for instance, and China to come up with the vaccines before the end of the year ahead of Western countries and big pharmaceutical companies. Pero alam natin, pagdating sa Russia, there are big concerns about the safety of their vaccines and whether they have followed the standard operating procedures. Nonetheless, by October, people in the Philippines and in some other countries around the world are expected to test, along with Russians, the new vaccines created in Moscow. And the world's two most affected countries, Brazil and United States, are also ramping up their efforts to come up with the vaccine. Sa kasalukuyan, up to 6,000 Brazilians have volunteered for vaccine trials under the auspices of big Western institutions. 5,000 of them have volunteered under a British-Swedish pharmaceutical company, AstraZeneca, in partnership with Oxford University. And another 1,000 have volunteered for New York-based Pfizer's trial. So we're talking about reputable and established institutions, whether big pharmaceutical companies and universities like Oxford. Sa United States naman, meron silang so-called OWS, Operation Warp Speed. Ang ginagawa ng US dito, unlike what certain critics imply vis-a-vis Russia, is not skipping the standard operating procedures. Sinisigurado pa rin ng Amerika na safe pa rin yung proseso of developing vaccines. What they do is they expedite the bureaucratic process of processing the papers and the approval of different stages of the trials. Pero ito ay base sa ebidensya. So in short, you're reducing the bureaucratic tape, but the medical trials themselves will remain intact and world standard. By January 2021, so early next year, the United States is hoping to produce up to 300 million vaccines among the candidates. Now, ang ginagawa ng Amerika dito is hindi nila hihintay na matapos buong proseso before they do advanced production. Kasi kung hinintay mo pa yung matapos yung vaccine approval and then nag-produce ka ba, then you're talking about a few other months. So ang ginagawa ng Amerika dito is they're already producing in advance yung mga potentially effective candidates. And then kung anong na-approve dyan, yun ang i-deploy nila sa taong bayan. Now, for President Duterte and a lot of leaders around the world, nakasalala yung kanilang strategy with the effectiveness of vaccines. But what if vaccines will not prove effective? Now, many talk about so-called herd immunity. Ito yung sitwasyon kung saan a large proportion of the population develops immunity to a certain virus, and that makes sure that it's not deadly and it's not going to affect the society in a significant way. Ang pinag-usapan dito is not a natural adoption of immunity, but actually immunity by the society developed or facilitated by vaccines. At ang key dito is so-called reproductive rate. A single infected person with the virus, ilang bang ma-infect niya? So in case of measles for children, for instance, yung isang infected person can infect 15 others. So you may need to immunize up to 90% or 95% of the population to get herd immunity. Now, pagdating sa coronavirus, the idea of natural immunity or natural herd immunity adoption is very questionable. Based on preliminary studies, baka up to 10% lang ng mga tao in certain areas develop immunity to the virus. And even if you develop antibodies after getting infected, it's not sure how long that can last and protect you from future infections. And the thing with coronavirus is that even compared to the SARS one, it has a different kind of profile and nature is very transmissible. So let's hope for the best, which is for the vaccines coming out as early as possible. But at the same time, we have to also prepare for any eventualities or contingencies. At dyan, dapat titignan natin yung mga ating neighbors, more effective neighbors like Vietnam and also Thailand. Now, alam natin Thailand is a very vulnerable country to pandemics because it is a tourist destination. And this is especially the case with pandemics coming from places like China dahil maraming Chinese tourists nandyan sa Thailand. So what the Thai government has done is not to only rely on vaccines but develop a whole infrastructure to fight back and to cope with any potential pandemic. So among things that Thailand has done is to develop a team of mostly women responsible for helping to enforce quarantine when people traveled between provinces or from overseas. They also visited areas considered vulnerable to outbreaks, including jails, migrant communities and border communities, and also providing public health information to local communities. So Thailand has kind of like a special forces unit for infectious diseases. Dubbed the Communicable Disease Control Unit, it is made up of to 1,000 teams distributed all over the country, and about 100 of them do investigation of very dangerous pathogens. In the case of Vietnam naman, they were also very strict in terms of the preventative measures, especially with tourists coming from over China. So meron silang very strict border patrols, very strict quarantine for people coming from potentially infected areas, especially China earlier this year. And the military in Vietnam was also mobilized to provide the facilities for this quarantine. Not to mention celebrities in the country were also involved in public information campaign and pushing for people to put masks and observe hygiene. We see the same trend in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Taiwan, in New Zealand, and many successful countries around the world. So vaccines or not, these countries are preparing the best ways possible to keep the country going, to keep the economy going, and to also protect the public health. Let's hope for the best when it comes to vaccines, and let's also learn from the best practices from our neighbors. Ako po si Richard Hedarian. Stand with us, stand for truth.